Why were cars so long in the 60s to 70s? The shape and overall design of cars evolved gradually. Early on they truly were a horseless carriage, that is, simply, a carriage driven by an engine instead of being pulled by a horse. In time the engine was moved from underneath to the front of the car in most cases. There was an effort to lower the center of gravity somewhat as it lent to better handling. At that point cars had quite a bit of legroom, at least in the rear. Trunks were an afterthought at this point, and really were a trunk made of wood or metal hanging off the back if present at all. Gradually automobiles became more aerodynamic and rounded. As the 50s wore on, cars like this started to look stodgy. GM and Ford, especially, realized that if you lowered, widened and lengthened a car as if King Kong had lightly stepped on the roof and smooshed it, you would end up with something much sportier in appearance. Notice the difference between that blue 50 Plymouth and this 58 Plymouth. Cars of this era were, in many cases, quite impractical compared to their predecessors. Legroom wasn't all it could have been, despite the length. Headroom was cut, of course. That 50 was famously designed so a man didn't have to remove his hat while driving. Tall drivers certainly couldn't do that with some later models. The length largely went into huge engine compartments and trunks. Cars like this, in the late 50s, went into overkill. Manufacturers went too far. That 58, for all its bulk, could still be purchased with a simple flathead 6-cylinder and 3-speed manual on the column. If all you wanted was a simple car, this left you wanting less. This led to the success of new compacts from Rambler, Studebaker, and soon the Big Three. But the full-size remained, and to many folks there was no going back. Gas was cheap, and those big cars rode like a dream on the interstate, though all that weight and soft springs meant they didn't deal well with curves or rough roads. As others have said, families tended to be larger. Some of those sedans could handle a family of 7, provided the kids were small and friendly enough with each other. Americans got used to this, why go backwards, to a smaller car? The trend for decades was longer, lower, wider, and it sold, and so it continued. Big America with big roads and big families, big men with big cigars, big engines with big gas tanks. Bigger is better. Pull it up to the man with the star at your local full-service Texaco station and load that tank with high test for 35 cents per gallon. But, then, the price of gas doubled and tripled. Americans realized they didn't really need a car that big. GM came out with full-size cars that were as big if not bigger on the inside, but a lot smaller on the outside and a big fuel mileage improvement. Those old longer, wider, shorter cars started looking old hat. The evolution continued. And it still does today. So, for a shorter answer, they were long because, here in America, 1, they could be, 2, a longer car was status symbol that people liked, 3, they offered plenty of room for people and stuff, and 4, they went away because more efficient packaging came along.